Welcome to Excel magic trick number 1321. Hey, if you want to download this Excel file, and there's a start file and a finish file so that you can follow along, click on the link below the video. Hey, we have a great video here. We need to calculate the time between starting college and taking a first geology class. Now, there's going to be 6 different methods, and if you look below in the description, there's a time hyperlink table of contents so you could jump to whichever solution you want. Now, here's the data set. And actually, a professor here at Highline College had this data analysis question, and he had a huge data set. But we have a simple data set here so we can visually see what's going on. Hey, there's the student ID. There's start dates for classes, and here's the classes. So it looks like this student started on 4/1/2000 with their first class, and they didn't take a geology class until 7/1/2000. Down here, this student started on 1/1/2000 and didn't take a geology class till 10/1/2003. So we need to figure out these two dates and then the number of days between them. Now, we have a bunch of solutions. The first couple ones are formulas, and then we'll see a cool pivot table and Power Query solution. Now, most of the solutions are going to assume that the data set is not sorted. We have it sorted here, and we'll see one solution if it's sorted. But in general, we don't want to assume that the data set is sorted. So we're going to have to calculate the first date, then the last date, and then the first geo date. And there's one condition. It's going to be student ID. Now, this solution will work in any version. I'm simply going to use the min function. But if I highlighted all of the dates, and notice dates are actually numbers. So an aggregate function that works on numbers will work perfect on dates. But if I highlighted all of them, it would just find the smallest one. We do not want all of the dates. We need to filter some of the dates out. So how are we going to do that? Well, we can use that with the if function. Now, the logical test usually expects the logical test that comes out true or false for one item. But we're going to give it the entire column of student ID. So I'm going to highlight all these, hit the F4 key. And then I'm going to ask the question, hey, are any of you equal to 102? Now, if I were to evaluate this and hit the F9 key, you can see we get a bunch of trues and falses. The trues will help us pick out exactly the dates we want. The falses will eliminate all the dates we don't want. Control Z. So there's our array of trues and falses, comma. What do we want if it's true? We want the entire column of dates. F4 to lock it. Now, I'm going to leave the false out so that a false will be inserted into the resultant array. Close parentheses. If I highlight the if now and F9 to evaluate it, there is our filtered lists. The min function and all aggregate functions are programmed to ignore logical values like this. So we'll only see these numbers. Control Z. Now, this is an array operation right here. We're doing an operation on not a single item on both sides, but an array of items here. So this is definitely an array operation. And that argument cannot handle this array operation unless we use the special keystroke Control-Shift-Enter. So I come to the end, close parentheses. Now I'm going to use Control-Shift and Enter. I immediately look up to the formula bar. Those curly brackets are Excel telling me that it understood that this is supposed to be an array calculation. Now I can copy this down. And there are our dates for each one of the students. Now I'm going to actually copy this. I'm going to cheat. Watch this. I'm going to copy this in edit mode, Control-C, Escape. Come over here, put the cell in edit mode, and Control-V. Now, last date, well, we can't use the min, but we can use the max. So I'm simply going to highlight in and type AX. And there it is. Now I can use Control-Shift-Enter. I look up, I verify that the curly brackets are there, and I can double-click and send it down. Actually, I should go to the last cell and hit F2 just to make sure that all the cell references are right. Now I want to click Escape here, because if I hit Enter, it will not be entered with the correct Control-Shift-Enter. So I'm going to click Escape. Now, the first geo date, I'm going to put this cell in edit mode and Control-V. There's my min. Well, that's not going to work because that'll do all of the dates for this particular student. And I actually have two conditions here. I also need to look through all of the classes and see if it contains geo. So I'm going to come right over here to my formula. And we need a second condition here. So instead of value of true values, I'm going to put a second if. Now I'm going to put a comma just in the second if. We can clearly see that the value of true is already there. But we need to build a second logical test. Now the way we're going to do this is we're going to actually search for geo within any one of these class names. So I'm going to use the search function. Now the search can find some text, and I'm going to look for geo, hit the F4 key to lock it, comma. Within, well, normally that argument expects a single item. We're going to give it the entire column. As soon as we do that, and I'm going to hit the F4 key, as soon as we put many items into that argument right there, this is a function argument array operation, it instructs search to spit out many answers. Now what does search do? Well, it's going to look for geo and find the position in this larger text string that it finds this geo. Now actually the pattern here is that geo always happens at the beginning. So we could have used the left function also, but I'm going to use search. Close parentheses. Now in the logical test, I'm just going to highlight search just to evaluate it with the F9 key to see what it gives me. Oh, well, it's always going to be 1. And I'm interested in the ones, right? Really from this resultant array, I want to ask the question, is the item a number? Control Z. So I simply wrap is number around it. Now, so I very carefully come to the end of search, close parentheses. Now in the logical test, F9, there's my series of trues and falses. Notice we're going to get some trues and falses from the first array operation here. And in the second, it's only when it finds a true in both places that it will pick out the date. Control Z. Very carefully, I'm going to come to the end, close parentheses. Now I enter this with Control Shift Enter. I immediately look up to the formula bar. There's my curly brackets. Double click and send it down. Go to the last cell, F2. Everything is looking fine. Escape. Now the difference is simply equals the first geo date minus the first date. Control Enter. So 91 days for the first student. Double click and send it down. 1,369 for student 105 and 0. That means they took geology in the very first quarter they started college. Now this solution here assumes that the data set is sorted. And as we mentioned, that's not a safe assumption. But if you did know that it was always sorted, I have a solution here. I'm not going to go through it, but we could actually use index and match with exact match to get the first date. Index and match with approximate match to get the last date. And then we could do this array calculation inside of match using left. Let's see what happens, though, if we unsort this. If I come up here and sort this column Z to A, all of these formulas work fine. And all the solutions that we're going to see will work fine. They can withstand a sorting. This one can't. Now I'm going to Control Z and look at our next example. Now up here, this solution required that we knew the special keystroke Control Shift Enter. Well, in 2010, Excel introduced the aggregate function, and we can do max and min calculations with the aggregate function. And aggregate has a special argument that will allow us to do array calculations without any special keystroke. So I do aggregate. And check this out. Aggregate does a bunch of aggregate calculations. Now, we would think that min and max would work. But for some reason, Microsoft programmed 1 all the way to 13 to not do array calculations. In fact, that's why there are 2 screen tips here. The first 13 follow this pattern. 14 and 19 follow the pattern of the first screen tip, including that array argument right there. So we're not going to use min and max. We're going to use large and small. So I'm going to use 15, which tells aggregate. Please do a small calculation, comma. Now we need to ignore errors because our array operation is going to have some errors, comma. And then in the array, we need to simulate what we did up here. The array all the items I want to potentially go and get, which are numbers, F4 to lock it. And I'm going to divide it by, in parentheses, an array operation that looks through the whole column, F4. And I'm going to ask the question, are any of you equal to 102? Now, what this will do is the bottom part, the denominator, gives us F9 trues and falses. The top part are numbers. Any number divided by true will give me the number. Any number divided by false will give me a divide by 0 error. Control Z. If I highlight the whole array in F9, there we go. So our filter for aggregate is an error, whereas our filter up for max and min was a false. Control Z. Now we need to pick, comma, with our K, the min. So with small, you say, I want which one? The first smallest, not the second or third or fourth, just the first. Close parenthesis, and that will work. Control Enter. I didn't use Control Shift Enter. And double click and send it down. Go to the last cell in F2. That is working. Now, I'm going to cheat F2 and copy this in edit mode. Control C, escape. Come over here, put it in edit mode, Control V, and I simply change from 15 to 14. And the rest of it is the same. Now it's going to calculate the max. Double click and send it down. So we have the first and the last. Now we're going to come over here. Similar to what we did with search and isNumber, we're actually going to have to add a second condition in the denominator. So watch this. I'm coming here. I'm very carefully putting double parentheses and either after or before. And I'm going to do it after. I'm going to say times a second array operation. Well, it was isNumber search. And we're going to find the text geo, F4 to lock it, comma, within the entire class column. And now I'm going to make sure and hit F4. Close parentheses, and I'm watching my screen tip. Close parentheses on the search. Close parentheses on the isNumber. And there we have, in the denominator, F9 are trues and falses for both of our conditions. But wait a second, those aren't trues and falses. Yes, the multiplying does a Boolean calculation. 0 means false, 1 means true. But when we do our division, we'll get the same thing, some divide by 0 errors. I did Control Z there. I'm going to highlight the entire array, F9. And there we go. We have filtered with divide by 0 error. Control Z. Of course, the 6 will tell aggregate to avoid those errors. And I'm going to Control Enter, not Control Shift Enter, and double click and send it down. Now we can simply take equals the geodate minus the min, Control Enter, double click and send it down. All right, so that's 2010 or later. Really, the best solution of all the solutions we're going to see is a function that not many of us have yet, MAXIFS and MINIFS. Now, if you're in Excel 2016 and you have the Insider program, which means you have to have the online version Office 365, you will have these. In later versions, they'll automatically be there. And this is just straight easy. MINIFS. I simply highlight the min range, F4 to lock it, comma, the criteria range, student IDs, F4 to lock it, comma, and then the criteria. That is beautiful. Control Enter. Double click and send it down. I'm going to put this in edit mode and cheat. Highlight, copy, escape. Come over here, Control V, and change the in to an X. Control Enter. Double click and send it down. And that is beautiful. If I come to the end, I'm verifying that all the cell references are working. Now I'm going to come here, Control V in edit mode, MINIFS. This is really beautiful because watch this. For our second condition, which is contains geo, I simply in criteria range, highlight the entire column here, F4 to lock it, comma. And then I can use a wildcard in the criteria. Double quotes, and I'm going to do contains. Actually, if the pattern really was always begins, then we wouldn't need this first wildcard. Because this wildcard will say 0 or more characters before whatever comes next. So I'm going to join it to my contains criteria up here, geo, F4, and then I'm going to join it with another wildcard. This just says that I can find geo over there all by itself or any number of characters before it or after it. That formula right there using MINIFS is by far the easiest of all these solutions. Double click and send it down. And then we simply say geo minus min, control enter, double click and send it down. Now we want to look at pivot tables. And one thing about all these is some people have preferences, right? There are definitely people that have the latest version that still use max and min and if, because that's what they're used to. Lots of people still use those because they, even though aggregate's been out for a long time, they don't know about it. And certainly not many people have this. The two pivot table solution may even be the solution that people want to use even if they have any of these versions, because that's the way they think. They think in pivot tables. So this is a pretty cool solution, but it's going to require that we do two different pivot tables and then a formula outside the pivot table. All right, single cell in the data set. I go up to Insert Pivot Table, or I use the keyboard Alt-N-V. Now I want to put it on a location in this sheet. I'm going to drag down. Maybe in cell E36, click OK. Now let me drag it down here. Now I need student ID down in the row area, so I'm going to drag this field down here. And this is an advantage to a pivot table, because when I drop it, instantly we get a unique list. All of those formula solutions above, we had to actually create the unique list of student IDs. Now we can simply drag start date down to values. Now it comes out as count, so I'm going to come over and right-click, summarize values by, and sure enough, there's our aggregate calculation min. Now it comes up as a straight number, so we right-click. You do not want to format cells. You want to use this option that only shows up in a pivot table, number formatting. If you come outside the pivot table and right-click, notice that option is not there. So inside the pivot table, please select number formatting. You can tell that this is not the real format cells dialog box because it only has one tab, not all the others. Now I click date, click OK. So there's our min date. Now we're going to do the same thing for max. I'm going to drag this down here. Right-click, summarize values by, and max. Right-click, number formatting, and we want date. Now, I would like to do the geo date in this pivot table, but that's going to require that I add something to the columns, and it will be criteria that will be used for the whole pivot table. So I'm going to create a second pivot table right off to the side. Click up in the data set, Alt-N-V, and I'm very carefully going to place it. Cell I36, click OK. Now redrag student ID down to rows, start date down to values. And then we want to take class and drag it to columns. Now actually that is not going to work because there's something off to the side, so I'm going to move this up here so it's not in the way. Now I'm going to drag class down to columns. And now I want to come over and filter. I actually could just uncheck everything and just show the geo. Or I could come up to label filters, contains, and I'm going to type geo. Click OK. And so now I have filtered. And I'm going to close this pivot table field list. Right-click, summarize values by, and I need the min geo date. Right-click, number formatting, date. And then for both of these pivot tables, I don't like the row labels, column labels, so I'm going to come up to Design, Report Layout, Show in Tabular. I'm going to do that over here, or two. Design, Report Layout, Show in Tabular. Now, I can move this down here. And now notice what's happening is I have multiple classes, and it's finding the min for all of them. But the grand total will always give me the min of all of the geo dates for this particular student. So now I can simply say equals. And if I click on here, I'm going to get my get pivot table. So I'm going to type these out. This is in L38. So L38 minus, and over here it is F37. F37. I'm visually checking because I typed those. Control Enter and copy it down. There you go, 2 pivot tables and some formulas. Now the last method will be Power Query. And we'll see how to do a contains calculation. Now in order to use Power Query, this has to be converted to an Excel table. So I'm going to, with the cell inside the table, click Insert Table or Control T. There's my dialog box. I click OK or Enter. I immediately want to create a table name. So I go up to Design, Properties, and up here, or I use the keyboard Alt-JTA. And I'm going to name this Student Class Table and Enter. Now I can click in a single cell, go up to Data. And in 2016, Power Query is called Get and Transform. In earlier versions, 2010 and 13, you had to go search Google, download Power Query, and then you had it as a separate tab. It is the From Table button that we use when our data is in an Excel table in this workbook. So I click From Table. Here's our 1, 2, 3 columns. I want to make sure that the start date has the data type date. Now, we could use the Group By feature right now to group by these and calculate the max and min for each one of our student IDs. But how are we going to get the geo date? I'm actually going to add an extra column that looks over here. And if it finds that it contains geo, it's going to put the date in this new column called geodate. Otherwise, it'll put nothing. Now watch this. Add column. We could do it manually, but check this out. Conditional column. This is a great user interface. The new column is going to be called geodate. If, and we're going to click the drop down and say the class column is not equals to, that's not the operator. We want contains. We could use begins with because I think our data set always, but I'm going to use contains. And then we have a choice here. Value, we can enter a value or select a column. I'm going to enter a value, geo. So there's the logical test in the if. Then this is the value if true, if you know Excel if. The value if true is going to be select a column, and it is our start date. Then we have value if false in an Excel if function, but here it's otherwise. And I'm simply going to type null. That will be an undefined value or a not entered value. When I click OK, I have a brand new geodate column. Now, we go back over to home and we use the group by. Now, for Excel people, group by sometimes is difficult, but you think of it as sum ifs or count ifs or min ifs or max ifs. Because what group by does is it'll create a unique list from this column, and it will make some calculation on one of the other columns. Group by, if you've used Access or you've written SQL, you will know this as group by. But we're going to click this. Us Excel people think of it as sum ifs. Now I want to group by student ID. That's what gives me the unique list. And it is the criteria that's going to be used for whatever calculation we do. Here's our new column. I'm going to call this min date. The operation, that is going to be min. And we're going to operate to calculate the min on start date. Now we add an aggregation. This is going to be max date. Tab, the operation. I can down arrow, up arrow to max, tab, tab, down arrow, and then I down arrow to start date. Tab, tab, tab. There it is, add aggregation. Enter. This one will be called min geodate. Tab. Now we're still going to do min here. So up arrow, tab, tab. And now I want to down arrow to the geodate column. And that will work. Tab. When I click OK, and there we go. There's our unique list of student ID, min calculation, max, and min geodate. We still have to add a final column, so I come up to Add Column. Add Column button. This one will be called something like geo minus min. I click under here for our custom column formula. I want to take min geodate, so I double click that, minus min date. And there we go. That will work. When I click OK, there are the improperly formatted numbers, but that will work. We come back over to Home, drop down, and I'm going to say whole number. There we go. Now we can load this back to Excel. Close and load to. Table existing. I'm going to click the collapse button and scroll down. Let's see, let's put this in E44 and click OK. Here's our load dialog box. I'm going to click load. And just like that, over here we have our query. And there is our report using Power Query. Wow, that was pretty amazing. We did this number of days until a student takes a geology class calculation with Power Query. We saw how to do it with 2 pivot tables in a formula. We saw how to do it with the amazing new MINIFS and MAXIFS. We saw how to do it with aggregate, isNumber, and search. We saw how to do it if the data set was sorted with index, match, a bunch of array calculations, and a left function. And we started this off with the good old min, if, isNumber, and search. All right, we'll see you next trick.